Billionaire came home early, saw Maid making his disabled son clean the floor. A billionaire father froze as he watched his disabled son tumble to the ground, the crutch clattering across the marble. For one desperate second, his heart screamed to lift the boy up, but pride slammed the door shut. Noah's tiny hands shook as he tried to rise, whispering that Sophia believed he could walk again. The billionaire's chest burned with shame, yet fury spilled from his lips instead. A father too proud to bend, a child too fragile to fight alone. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Richard stepped into the mansion earlier than anyone expected, his briefcase still in hand. The house was too quiet until he heard the faint sound of cloth dragging against the floor. His eyes landed on Noah, his 7-year-old son, down on his knees with a rag in one hand, balancing shakily on one crutch. Beside him was Sophia, the young maid, whispering encouragement as if each wipe of the rag was part of a secret training. Noah's face shone with pride as he gasped that he could almost stand without help. For a moment, Richard froze, his chest tightening. His boy, the one he had poured millions into doctors for, was crawling on the ground like a servant. Then it happened. The crutch slipped from Noah's reach, his legs buckled, and his small body hit the floor hard. Richard's heart jumped into his throat. His first instinct was to run, to scoop Noah up before the pain reached him. His foot even shifted forward, but he stopped. He clenched his jaw, swallowing the fear, letting pride shove compassion down. Sophia rushed to Noah's side, panic in her voice as she checked his scraped knees. Noah winced, but his hand clung to the rag, insisting he could try again. Richard stood rigid, fists tight, fighting the urge to kneel. Shame twisted inside him, sharper than the sight of blood. Instead of showing the terror in his chest, his voice erupted, accusing Sophia of exploiting his son, of dragging him into dangerous games. The echo of his roar filled the grand room. Noah's tears blurred his eyes as he shouted back that Sophia was the only one who believed he could walk again. Richard staggered, the truth striking like a blow. He had spent fortunes, yet never once bent down to cheer his child on. For a second, the mask almost cracked. The image of lifting his son into his arms burned inside him. But pride won. He stood tall, hiding his tremor behind fury. The house quivered with Noah's sobs, and Richard, for the first time, felt both the power and the curse of being a stranger in his own home. Richard had not always been this cold. 4 years earlier, his wife Emily had collapsed after a sudden illness, leaving him with a boy who needed more love than ever. Instead of facing the grief, Richard buried himself in his empire, hiding inside boardrooms and spreadsheets. He told himself that money could fix what was broken. But grief does not listen to logic, and Noah was left waiting at windows for a father who rarely came home before midnight. Noah had been born with fragile legs. Doctors used words like congenital weakness and long-term therapy. Richard's first instinct was to throw money at the problem. He hired specialists, ordered equipment, and demanded quick results. When progress was slow, his patience snapped. He called it a waste of time and walked away. In his world, failure was unacceptable. But Noah was not a contract or a skyscraper. He was a child who cried into his pillow because the man he called Dad could not sit still long enough to hear him. The mansion itself turned into a prison of silence. Marble floors, chandeliers, and expensive art could not cover the emptiness. Tutors came and left, nurses rotated, but none of them filled the gap. At night, the halls echoed with Noah's small voice, asking if his mum could come back, and the walls never answered. Richard told himself the boy had everything. What he really had was loneliness dressed in luxury. Sophia entered this cold house almost by accident. At 29, she carried the weight of a family that had crossed the border from Mexico with nothing. Her mother worked endless night shifts cleaning offices. Her younger brother was born with weak legs, and she had once spent years coaxing him to walk again. College dreams disappeared when bills piled up, and Sophia picked up any work she could find. By the time she walked into Richard's home, her hands were already calloused, her back already bent with sacrifice. What set Sophia apart was not her position, but her heart. She understood the way Noah's eyes dimmed when no one listened. She knew how pain made a child close in on himself, because she had seen it in her brother. So she sat with Noah, not as a nurse, not as a maid, but as someone who understood. She gave him patience where others gave orders. She gave him laughter when the house was silent. And in a place where millions could buy anything, she gave the one thing Noah could not find anywhere else: hope. Richard stormed into the room later that evening, his voice still edged with the fury he had swallowed earlier. He demanded to know what Sophia thought she was doing, standing in front of Noah like she had any right. His words lashed out, saying she was a maid, not a therapist, and her interference could cripple his son forever. Sophia's lips trembled, her hands twisting together as she tried to explain that Noah needed encouragement, not abandonment. But Richard's glare cut her off, sharp and unforgiving. Noah, clutching his crutches, felt the heat of his father's anger fill the room. His small chest heaved as he shouted that Sophia was the only one who stayed when he cried at night. His voice cracked as he hurled the truth that his father never listened, never cared to know the sound of his tears. Richard staggered under those words, his throat burning. For a moment his eyes softened, the sight of his son's pain pulling at something buried deep. His mouth opened, as if to say he was wrong, but pride rushed in like a wall. Sophia stepped forward, her voice shaking, insisting she only wanted to help Noah believe in himself. Richard's fists tightened at his sides. He turned away, as though if he looked at her any longer he might break. He could feel the weight of Noah's eyes on him, pleading for him to bend, but every instinct screamed that bending would make him weak. After a long silence, he spat out the words that sealed the wound. He told Sophia to pack her things and leave. Noah's cry tore through the room, louder than any command Richard had ever given. He threw himself against Sophia, clinging to her waist, screaming that if she left, he would never forgive his father. Richard's jaw clenched so hard it ached. His heart pounded with shame, but he buried it under the mask of discipline. He told himself it was for Noah's good, even as the boy's sobs split him open inside. And in that crushing moment, the man who held power over skyscrapers could not even hold the love of his own child. Sophia stood frozen at the doorway, her bag clutched tight in trembling hands. Her eyes shone with unshed tears as she whispered that before she left, Richard deserved to know the truth. Her voice shook, but she forced the words out. She told him her younger brother had been born with legs just as fragile as Noah's. She had spent her childhood in hospital corridors, learning exercises, massaging stiff muscles, celebrating every single step. She said she could not stand by and watch Noah sink into the same loneliness she had once seen in her brother's eyes. Richard stiffened, but her words pierced straight through him. He tried to respond with logic, insisting money could buy the best doctors, that Noah needed professionals, not sympathy. But Sophia's voice hardened, pain sharpening it into something almost defiant. She told him no paycheck could sit at a bedside when a child cried. No skyscraper could clap when Noah managed to stand for 1 second longer than yesterday. Her eyes met his, unflinching, and she told him that what Noah needed most was not another specialist. He needed a father. The air grew heavy. Noah's small voice cracked through the silence. He shouted that Sophia was right. He sobbed that his dad did not even know his favorite breakfast, that he never came when nightmares woke him. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he said his mom used to know everything, and now Sophia was the only one who listened. Richard's throat tightened, his chest aching with guilt, but with Noah standing there, the words cut him like accusations. He felt stripped bare, exposed in front of his son. That was when pride twisted into something harsher. Richard's silence was not just coldness, it was defense. He felt cornered, humiliated in his own house, attacked by both his son and the woman he had hired. His body screamed to admit the truth, to reach out, but his mind locked him inside a cage. The longer he stood there, the more his pride told him he had to stay in control, so he said nothing. Sophia lowered her head, tears sliding down her cheeks, and stepped into the hall. The sound of the door closing left the mansion colder than it had ever been. Richard walked into Noah's room a few days after Sophia had gone, hoping to see his son studying or at least playing. Instead, the boy sat slumped at his desk, a box of crayons scattered across the floor. When Richard picked up the paper in front of him, his chest clenched. It was a family portrait. Emily's smile filled the left side. Sophia's figure held Noah's hand on the right, and in the middle was a little boy with shaky legs. Richard searched for himself, but there was nothing, not even a shadow. When he asked softly where he was, Noah whispered that maybe he did not belong. The words carved into him deeper than any boardroom insult. The mansion grew heavier after that. Noah refused to practice, refused to even touch his crutches. Meals went untouched, laughter vanished. Richard began to see the truth he had ignored for years. His son was retreating into a world where his father had no place. That realization followed him into the next board meeting. The shareholders stared at him, irritated as he lost track of numbers he once commanded with ease. One man sneered that maybe Coleman no longer had control. Another muttered that he should step down before he ruined the company. Richard sat frozen, but all he could see was the empty space in Noah's drawing. Across the city, Sophia was fighting her own battle. A wealthy family had heard of her work and offered her a salary beyond her dreams, enough to pay for her brother's therapy and her mother's medicine. Her mother begged her to accept, her voice cracking with fatigue from endless night shifts. Her brother coughed through the phone, confessing he sometimes skipped pills to save money. Sophia's hands shook as she folded the letter of offer. It promised stability, comfort, everything her family had been denied for years. But every night when she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's tearful face, his arms clinging to her waist, his desperate plea not to be abandoned. She sat awake in the dark, torn between duty and love. One choice could save her family from poverty. The other would keep her tied to a boy who was not hers, but had already claimed her heart. Sophia pressed her forehead against the windowpane, whispering that maybe God was cruel to test her like this. The offer glittered like salvation, yet all she felt was guilt, because no matter how much her family needed her, part of her already belonged to Noah, and the thought of him giving up hope without her was a burden she could not shake. Noah waited until the house was quiet before he tried again. His crutches leaned against the wall at the top of the staircase. He pressed his small hands against the banister, whispering that if Sophia were here, she would cheer him on. His thin legs shook as he lifted one step forward. For a moment, he managed to stand, a spark of pride flashing in his eyes. But then his foot slipped on the polished wood. His body tumbled down the steps, and the crash echoed through the mansion like thunder. Richard rushed out of his study, his heart leaping to his throat. He found Noah sprawled at the bottom of the stairs, tears streaking his face, his little chest heaving in pain. The boy gasped out words between sobs, begging his father not to let Sophia go. He cried that he needed her, that without her he was nothing. Then his voice broke, his eyes rolled back, and his small body went limp in his father's arms. Panic gripped Richard harder than any boardroom failure ever had. He scooped Noah up and shouted for the driver. In the car, he pressed the boy close, whispering desperate promises. He kept repeating that everything would be fine, though terror rattled his voice. At the hospital, doctors rushed Noah away, their instructions sharp and clipped. Richard stood helpless in the hallway, his hands trembling, feeling more powerless than he had in his entire life. When the doctor finally emerged, his words cut deeper than any insult. He said Noah's body was fragile, that stress and hopelessness could be more dangerous than the condition itself. He noted the boy's recent progress, the strength he had shown. Then he asked Richard a question that left him speechless. Who had been working with Noah? Because whoever it was had given the child more hope than any specialist on the payroll. Richard lowered his head, knowing the answer was Sophia. In that sterile hallway, Richard broke. Tears welled up as the truth clawed its way out. He had pushed away the only person who had given his son courage. He had turned his pride into a prison for them both. Now, watching his boy lie unconscious, Richard felt the full weight of his failure. For the first time, the cold billionaire wept openly, realizing that all his money and power could not buy back what his pride had destroyed. Richard pushed open the door of the small grocery store, its buzzing fluorescent light a stark contrast to the marble halls he was used to. Behind the counter, Sophia wore a faded apron, her eyes tired from long hours. She froze when she saw him, the man who had once banished her. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Richard's voice cracked. He told her he was sorry. Not the kind of sorry tossed off in boardrooms, but the raw kind that stripped a man of his pride. Sophia's hands tightened on the register. She asked why he had come after all the things he said. Her voice trembled as she reminded him that she did not belong in his world, that people like him and people like her were never meant to meet except through doors of service. She said Noah deserved someone who would not be torn down by whispers and judgment. Richard shook his head, his chest heavy, and told her he did not care about the whispers anymore. He cared only about his son. Sophia turned away, her voice almost breaking. She said his words sounded kind tonight, but tomorrow he might regret lowering himself for her. She said she could not risk being dragged back, only to be cast aside again. Richard's face drained of color. For the first time, the man who commanded towers of steel looked almost broken. His voice shook as he pleaded. He told her Noah needed her more than air. He admitted that he, too, needed her, because she had given back what money never could. His shoulders slumped as he whispered that without her, he did not know how to be a father. Sophia blinked back tears, stunned by the sight of a billionaire, stripped to desperation. He was no longer the man who had shouted in fury, no longer the CEO guarded by pride. He was simply a father begging for help, a man on the edge of losing the one person who could hold his family together. That was the moment something shifted. Sophia's heart trembled. She had never seen Richard Coleman so fragile, so human. And in that quiet, she understood that this was not about wealth or power anymore. This was about a father choosing love over pride. The morning Sophia returned, the air in the mansion felt different. Noah's eyes lit up the moment he saw her standing in the doorway, and he nearly tripped over his crutches trying to reach her. Richard was already waiting in the garden, dressed simply, sitting cross-legged on the ground as if to prove he was not above getting dirty this time. Sophia knelt beside Noah and whispered encouragements, her hands steady on his small shoulders. Richard placed a hand on his son's arm, telling him he would be there for every step. Noah's legs shook as he let the crutches fall to the side. His breaths came fast, his chest rising and falling as if every second was a battle. Richard's voice was calm, telling him to take it slow, to trust that he was not alone. Sophia counted softly, her tone filled with warmth. Noah lifted one foot, then another. The steps were crooked, his body trembling, but he pushed forward, his eyes locked on his father. After 3 steps, his strength gave way, and he stumbled. Richard lunged forward, catching him in his arms before he hit the ground. Sophia wrapped them both, her arms trembling as tears spilled down her face. Noah buried his face in his father's chest and sobbed that he finally had both his dad and his best friend. He said he was not alone anymore. In that moment, the walls of pride and sorrow crumbled. What remained was a family bound by love, holding each other tightly as if the world could never break them apart again. Richard began to change in ways no one expected. He cancelled meetings that once seemed untouchable and shelved projects worth millions. When questioned by his board, he told them his son's childhood could not wait, and for once, no one could argue. Each morning he sat in the garden, cheering for Noah as the boy stretched and tried new steps. The sound of laughter replaced the echo of silence that had haunted the mansion for years. Whispers soon spread in social circles. People asked why a billionaire would place so much trust in a maid. Richard silenced them with a simple truth. He said Sophia had given his son what all the money in the world could not. She gave him hope. He declared publicly that he would stand by her no matter what others thought. The cold CEO who once hid behind pride now defended her as family. Sophia, with Richard's support, began to study physical therapy. He set up a scholarship so she would never again have to choose between her dreams and survival. At night, she still worked with Noah, guiding his every step with patience and love. Richard often joined them, learning how to encourage rather than command. Slowly, the three of them built a rhythm, each carrying the other when one grew tired. One afternoon, the miracle everyone had waited for came. A ball rolled across the grass, and Noah, eyes wide with determination, pushed forward without his crutches. His legs wobbled, but he kept going until he reached it. For the first time, he ran. He turned back, laughing through tears, shouting for his dad and Sophia to look. Richard's heart swelled as he lifted his son high into the air. It was not victory measured in numbers. It was love, patience, and healing finally blooming into life. The sun fell gently over the garden as Richard, Sophia, and Noah knelt together in the soft earth. Instead of a lavish celebration, they held a small sapling between them, its fragile roots ready for a new beginning. Noah laughed as he patted the soil with his tiny hands. Sophia guided him, and Richard pressed his palm into the dirt, as if sealing a promise. Together they planted not just a tree, but the symbol of a family rebuilt with love. Richard looked up, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. He turned his gaze as if speaking to those beyond the garden. He said he once believed success was numbers and towers of glass, but he was wrong. True success, he said, is hearing your child call you dad with pride in his eyes. His words carried no arrogance, only the raw honesty of a man who had finally learned what mattered most. As he finished, Noah pushed himself up, his crutches left aside. With determination, the boy took a few steps across the grass, his face glowing with joy. Sophia clapped her hands, tears shining as she cheered him on. Richard stood frozen for a heartbeat, then tears blurred his vision. He watched his son running free for the first time, and in that moment, no fortune on earth could compare. From a broken mansion to a garden filled with new hope, this family's journey began with anger and loneliness and ended with healing and love. Richard learned that wealth means nothing without presence. Noah discovered strength through love, and Sophia proved that compassion can change destinies. Their story is not just about them. It's a reminder for all of us that kindness and family are the true treasures of life. If this story touched you, share your feelings in the comments, subscribe, like, and share emotional echoes so more hearts can be reached. Thanks for listening.